He was a man who changed the fate of the Roman world, a statesman, a soldier, a writer, and a visionary, yet also a man whose ambition stirred the very foundations of the Republic itself. Tonight, we journey not just through the rise and fall of a man, but through the delicate web of history that he incredibly altered, a story that begins in the crumbling alleys of ancient Rome and ends beneath the shadow of a fallen dagger. This is the rise and fall of Julius Caesar. So breathe deeply, settle in, and allow the mysteries of time and space to cradle your imagination. For in the quiet hours of the night, under the same stars watched by our ancestors, the secrets of long-lost civilizations await, patiently, quietly, like ancient stars still shining from light years away. Thank you to those of you who have already subscribed and continue to watch these videos. Your support helps me to create more journeys like this one, and I'm so grateful to have you here. Let's begin. The air is thick with the scent of olive trees and dust as the city of Rome stirs under the soft glow of a waking sun. Picture narrow streets paved with worn stones, the murmur of early traders setting up their stalls, and the distant sounds of temple bells ringing gently through the morning air. In these winding avenues, amidst the clang of artisans and the low voices of merchants, a child is born into a world on the brink of greatness and peril. His name, Gaius Julius Caesar. Born in the year 100 BC, Caesar entered life cradled in both privilege and precariousness. His family, the Julii, was patrician, of ancient aristocratic stock, yet in his time they held little real power. Their name was noble, but their fortunes were modest, their influence overshadowed by other clans who maneuvered like seasoned players in the chaotic theatre of Roman politics. Rome itself was a republic in name, but beneath its proud facade, it was a city perpetually at odds with itself, rife with corruption, factionalism, and the heavy burden of conquest and expansion. Caesar's father, Gaius Julius Caesar the Elder, served as a governor in Asia, yet died unexpectedly when Caesar was just 16. His mother, Aurelia, was known for her strength and dignity, traits she surely passed to her son. She watched over his education with a keen eye, ensuring he was steeped not just in the traditional studies of rhetoric and philosophy, but also the stern virtues of discipline, courage, and cunning, essential tools for navigating Roman society. In these formative years, young Caesar absorbed the rich heritage of his city. He learned the tales of Aeneas and Romulus, of duty to the gods, and the weighty responsibility of legacy. In the Forum, he would have seen statues of great men, their marble visages gazing coldly over the thronging populace. Perhaps he wondered, as so many ambitious Roman youths did, whether his own likeness might one day stand among them. Yet Rome was also a city of peril. As Caesar stepped into adolescence, the Republic was racked by civil strife, the power struggle between the populares, champions of the common people, and the optimates, defenders of the old aristocracy, threatened to engulf the city in violence. It was a world of shifting alliances and sudden betrayals, where yesterday's ally might be tomorrow's executioner. It was within this volatile landscape that Caesar's first defining choice was made. When the ruthless general Sulla seized power as dictator, he began a systematic purge of his enemies, posting proscription lists, notices of those condemned to death, in the Forum. Caesar's family ties made him an immediate target. Through his marriage to Cornelia, the daughter of a prominent populares leader, Caesar defied Sulla's demands to divorce her. It was an act of youthful resolve, some might say recklessness, but it was a decision that foreshadowed the steadfastness of character he would carry throughout his life. To escape Sulla's wrath, Caesar went into hiding, moving through the countryside in disguise, braving disease, danger, and destitution. It was said that influential allies and a hefty bribe eventually persuaded Sulla to spare the young Caesar, though not without the ominous remark that in Caesar, Sulla saw many Mariuses. It was a warning, a prophecy, that this youth carried the seeds of upheaval within him. The boy who returned from hiding was no longer a sheltered aristocrat. He had tasted fear, poverty, and the thin line between survival and oblivion. From this crucible, Caesar emerged as sharper, more cautious, but with a burning ambition, fanned by the knowledge that life in Rome could change in the blink of an eye. Power, he understood, was the only true shield against the winds of fate. And so, with a mind sharpened by adversity, Caesar embarked on the path that countless Roman men of promise had trodden before, the cursus honorum, the sequential ladder of political offices that led from obscurity to glory. But he was no ordinary man, and the city that watched him grow would soon see that he was destined not just to ascend these steps, but to redefine them entirely. As the sun begins its climb over the 7 hills of Rome, the streets hum with activity. Yet somewhere, within the heart of the city, a young Caesar looks out from his modest home. Perhaps he dreams of a different Rome, a Rome not torn by petty feuds, but united under a single unyielding vision. The breeze carries the distant aroma of fresh bread and crushed grapes, the sounds of life echoing through marble courtyards and shaded atriums. It is in this quiet, in these ordinary moments, that history often waits, unassuming, patient, watching as the child takes his first steps toward destiny. The air beyond the borders of Rome is cooler, gentler, tinged with the briny scent of the sea and the whisper of foreign winds brushing over distant shores. To journey away from the eternal city is to enter landscapes alive with the songs of unfamiliar birds, the rustle of olive groves, and the hum of strange tongues in bustling marketplaces. It was across these far-flung provinces that the young Julius Caesar found himself after the harrowing turmoil of his youth, a self-imposed exile of sorts, a necessary retreat from the dangerous gaze of Rome's dictator Sulla. When Sulla eventually died in 78 BC, his iron grip on the Republic's throat loosened, and the bloody proscriptions that had terrorized Rome gave way to an uneasy peace. It was then that Caesar cautiously returned to the city, the familiar contours of Rome's 7 hills now shaded by memories of loss and danger. Yet Rome was still Rome, vast, sprawling, and restless, its streets alive with debates, conspiracies, and the relentless pulse of power. But Caesar knew that his return alone would not secure his place. To stand out among Rome's elite, a man needed more than birthright. He needed reputation, glory, and the applause of his peers. And so, Caesar sought to forge his legacy not through immediate politics, but through military distinction. He journeyed east to the provinces of Asia Minor, a region steeped in both wealth and warfare, where Roman authority intertwined with the intrigues of local kings and satraps. It was during his service there that Caesar first exhibited the audacity that would become his signature. In the campaign against Mytilene on the island of Lesbos, he fought with such courage that his superiors could not help but notice. For saving the life of a fellow Roman citizen during combat, Caesar was awarded the Corona Civica, the civic crown made of oak leaves, a high honor that conferred not only prestige, but a constant reminder of one's duty to Rome. The recipient of such a crown was revered, and any Roman citizen who encountered him was obligated to stand in his presence as a sign of respect. Even as a young man, Caesar had carved out a symbol of his worth, not with wealth, but with bravery. Yet perhaps the most revealing episode of these years came not from the battlefield, but from the open sea. While sailing the Aegean waters, his vessel was intercepted by Cilician pirates, notorious seafarers who roamed these coasts in search of ransom and fortune. When the pirates captured Caesar, they demanded 20 talents of silver for his release. Unimpressed, Caesar scoffed and declared he was worth at least 50 talents, instructing his attendants to collect the necessary sum while he remained their guest. But Caesar was no ordinary captive. He moved among the pirates with a peculiar ease, treating them less as captors and more as temporary hosts. He participated in their games, recited poetry, and delivered speeches, all the while warning them, with disarming confidence, that once free, he would return and crucify them all. The pirates laughed, taking his threats as the playful boast of an aristocrat too refined for vengeance. Yet Caesar remembered. Upon his release, he immediately raised a small fleet, pursued the pirates, captured them, and true to his word, had them crucified, though he tempered his retribution with mercy, ensuring they were killed swiftly to spare them prolonged suffering. This episode, half adventure, half lesson, reveals much about the man Caesar was becoming. Daring, charismatic, ruthless when necessary, but always aware of the performance that leadership demanded. Returning to Rome, Caesar stepped into a city that was both familiar and transformed. The scars of Sulla's dictatorship still marked the political landscape. The Senate remained powerful, yet corruption festered in its marble halls, and the cries of the plebeians echoed in the shadow of the Capitoline Hill. The Republic, proud in its name, was a fractured theatre where old families clung to tradition, while newer forces agitated for change. Caesar aligned himself with the populares, the political faction that claimed to champion the common people against the entrenched nobility. It was a clever alignment, one that allowed Caesar to frame himself as both an heir to Rome's ancient lineages and a man of the people. He was elected to various minor offices, each step positioning him closer to the true levers of power. But his greatest weapon was his voice, his oratory, smooth and compelling, capable of swaying crowds and silencing critics. He spoke with a softness that drew listeners closer, his arguments woven like silk threads that wrapped around the minds of his audience until they could not help but agree. At the same time, Caesar cultivated his image with great care. He was meticulous about his appearance, always neatly groomed, his clothing elegant yet never ostentatious. He understood the power of perception, that to be seen was to be remembered, and that memory was a form of immortality in Rome. His debts began to accumulate as he spent lavishly on public games, festivals, and acts of generosity. Each coin spent another stone laid in the path toward influence. Many frowned upon his extravagance, yet Caesar saw it as an investment, the cost of popularity, the price of destiny. Yet beyond politics, Caesar's mind hungered for more. He studied rhetoric in Rhodes under Apollonius Molon, a famed teacher who had instructed many great men. From him, Caesar refined his speech, his control of language, and his philosophical grounding. These lessons enriched not only his political maneuvering, but his understanding of power itself, that it was not only wielded through the sword, but through words, through vision, through the art of leading others to believe. As Rome shifted through its endless cycles of power and protest, Caesar prepared himself for a larger stage. His return was no longer that of an exile, but of a man reawakened to his purpose. His early years of danger, daring, and discipline had forged in him a restless brilliance, a hunger not merely for survival, but for greatness. The Republic, crumbling yet proud, stood before him like a vast and intricate game board. Every senator, every general, every province, a piece waiting to be moved. And so, beneath the vast expanse of the Roman night sky, where the constellations seemed to whisper of gods and mortals alike, Caesar gazed upward with quiet determination. The Tiber flowed on, dark and steady, a silent witness to the ambitions that stirred along its banks. The air carried the fragrance of laurel and pine, and in the gentle rustle of the city's trees, it was almost as if Rome itself was holding its breath, waiting for the man who would one day dare to crown himself master of all. The morning air in Rome carries a gentle chill, the kind that coaxes citizens from their beds slowly, with the promise of a day kissed by sunlight, but tempered by the cool embrace of the early hours. The Forum stirs with life once more, its marble columns casting long shadows over stone pavements worn smooth by generations of feet. Merchants set up their stalls beneath striped awnings, the aroma of fresh bread mingling with the scent of crushed herbs, while the distant clang of metal against metal reminds the city that its legions, ever restless, continue their drills beyond the walls. Amidst this familiar hum of Roman life, a figure walks with purpose, not yet the giant he is destined to become, but already a man whose name carries weight. Julius Caesar is no longer just a promising youth, he is becoming a name among men. His return from studies in Rhodes and his exploits abroad had marked him as a man of considerable ability, yet in Rome, talent alone was never enough. Politics was a battlefield of words and wills, where allies could become rivals with the turn of a phrase, and enemies smiled across banquet tables as easily as they wielded daggers in the dark. Caesar understood this, and he moved with care and charisma, climbing the ranks of the cursus honorum, Rome's ladder of public office. His every move was deliberate, each gesture calculated to reinforce his image as a leader of the people, a patrician who did not disdain the plebeians, but embraced them. It was during his tenure as aedile, a magistrate responsible for public buildings and festivals, that Caesar's flair for spectacle truly shone. He orchestrated grand games, elaborate processions, and public feasts that dazzled the Roman populace. Exotic animals, chariots, actors, and musicians paraded through the streets, turning Rome itself into a living theatre. The crowds loved him for it, their cheers echoing through the city, like waves breaking upon the shore. Yet these displays came at a cost. Debts mounted higher than the statues that adorned the Forum, yet Caesar remained undeterred. "I would rather be first in a village than second in Rome," he was said to have declared, revealing the depth of his ambition. He knew that in the game of power, fortune favoured those willing to gamble all. His ascent continued with his appointment as Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, a role of immense religious and social significance. Securing this office was no simple feat. It required deft political maneuvering and generous expenditures, but it placed Caesar at the spiritual heart of Roman life. He presided over sacred rites, interpreted omens, and ensured that the favour of the gods was ever upon the city, or so the people were led to believe. In this position, Caesar further wove himself into the fabric of Roman identity, becoming not just a political figure, but a guardian of Rome's ancient traditions. Yet his ambitions extended beyond the city's walls. In Spain, where Rome's influence mingled with the rugged defiance of Iberian tribes, Caesar served as propraetor, governing with both strength and subtlety. There, amidst the red earth and wild hills, he earned the loyalty of his legions, men who saw in him not a distant aristocrat, but a leader willing to share their hardships. He marched with them, ate their rations, and bled beside them when the battles grew fierce. It was said that he once paused before a statue of Alexander the Great, reflecting that by the same age, Alexander had conquered much of the known world, while he, Caesar, had yet to make his mark. The comparison weighed heavily on him, a silent goad to push further, faster, higher. Upon his return to Rome, Caesar sought the consulship, the highest elected office in the Republic. It was the pinnacle of the political ladder, but securing it meant navigating a treacherous landscape of rivals and alliances. To achieve his goal, Caesar formed a strategic partnership with two of Rome's most powerful men, Pompey the Great, Rome's celebrated general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in the Republic. This unofficial alliance, known to history as the First Triumvirate, was a union of ambition, wealth, and military might. Together, they held sway over Rome, each benefiting from the other's strengths, while concealing the fissures that would one day crack their alliance apart. With the consulship secured in 59 BC, Caesar wielded his authority to push through reforms, many of which favored the common people and veterans of Pompey's campaigns. Land redistribution, debt relief, and legislative changes won him popular support, but stoked the ire of the Senate's conservative faction, the Optimates. Yet Caesar, ever astute, balanced these reforms with gestures to his powerful allies, ensuring that his position remained unassailable, at least for now. But Rome was never a place where power could be held without challenge. Enemies whispered in corners, and old families plotted his downfall. Caesar knew that to remain in Rome was to risk being swallowed by the endless churn of political intrigue. He needed distance, a theatre where he could expand his power, wealth, and reputation beyond the reach of jealous senators. The provinces of Gaul, restless and unruly, provided the perfect stage. As the city's sounds softened under the fall of night, Caesar prepared for the next chapter of his life. His household buzzed quietly with the movements of slaves and scribes, letters being sealed and supplies inventoried. The stars shimmered like scattered silver across the dark velvet sky, their quiet brilliance untouched by mortal concerns. Somewhere within his villa, Caesar stood in contemplation, knowing that beyond the northern frontiers lay not only the wild tribes of Gaul, but his own destiny, vast, unclaimed, and waiting. In the gentle hush of the Roman night, with the Tiber flowing steadily as ever, one could almost sense the weight of history preparing to shift. The man who had risen from debt and danger, through spectacle and shrewd alliances, was ready to march beyond Rome, to carve his name not just into the annals of the Senate, but into the very soil of the world itself. Imagine standing at the edge of the known world, where the forests grow darker and thicker, the rivers run broader and colder, and the land stretches beyond imagination. The air is crisp and wild, filled with the scent of pine, damp earth, and smoke from distant tribal fires. It is here, on the northern frontier of the Roman Republic, that Julius Caesar prepares to write his name in letters bolder and bloodier than ever before. Beyond these frontiers lies Gaul, a land of countless tribes, fierce warriors, and boundless opportunity. For Caesar, it is not merely a province, it is a canvas upon which he will paint his vision of conquest and glory. Appointed as governor of Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum in 58 BC, Caesar inherited command of several legions, but Gaul was restless. The migration of the Helvetii tribe, seeking new lands, threatened the fragile stability of Roman territories. When the Helvetii began their great migration westward, it was Caesar who saw not just a threat, but an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate Roman might and, in doing so, solidify his own power. The campaigns began with calculated precision. Caesar engaged the Helvetii at the Battle of Bibrat, where strategy, discipline, and the famed resilience of the Roman legions triumphed over the migrating tribes. The victory was complete, and the Helvetii were forced to return to their homeland, a stern reminder of Rome's dominion. Yet, this was only the beginning. Gaul, with its myriad peoples, the Belgae in the north, the Aquitani in the southwest, and countless other tribes, represented both a challenge and a prize. Caesar's ambition would not be sated with a single victory. Year after year, Caesar pushed deeper into Gaul. His commentaries, which he meticulously wrote and distributed in Rome, portrayed his campaigns not merely as wars of conquest, but as necessary for the security of the Republic. The Gallic tribes, according to Caesar, were volatile, dangerous, and in need of Rome's civilizing order. Yet behind these polished words lay the grinding reality of war, brutal sieges, treacherous alliances, and rivers that ran red with the blood of the fallen. Among the most formidable of his foes was Vercingetorix, a charismatic and unifying chieftain of the Arverni tribe. Where other Gallic leaders had faltered in disunity, Vercingetorix sought to forge a confederation of tribes to resist Roman encroachment. He was young, bold, and skilled in the art of guerrilla warfare, harassing Caesar's supply lines and evading direct confrontation. For the first time, Caesar faced a commander who could match his cunning with patience and strategy. Their epic confrontation came at the siege of Alesia in 52 BC, a fortress town perched upon a high plateau, encircled by vast plains. Caesar's legions built an extraordinary system of fortifications, encircling the town to starve out Vercingetorix and his warriors, while simultaneously constructing a second line of defences to repel the massive Gallic relief army that sought to break the siege. The work was relentless, the pressure immense, but the discipline of the Roman soldiers held firm. Day and night, the sounds of hammers on wood, the clinking of spades against soil, and the low murmur of soldiers at work filled the air. The final battles around Alesia were fierce and desperate, with the fate of Gaul hanging in the balance. In the end, Roman organization and determination prevailed. Vercingetorix, recognizing the hopelessness of his position, surrendered in a gesture both noble and tragic. He rode from the gates of Alesia in full armor, circled by silence, and laid his weapons at Caesar's feet. It was a moment of theatre and power, the embodiment of a land subdued. With the fall of Alesia, resistance in Gaul crumbled, and the province was brought under Roman control. For Caesar, the conquest of Gaul was more than a military success. It was a political masterpiece. His commentaries on the Gallic War circulated back in Rome, casting him not only as a brilliant general, but as a protector of Rome's destiny. The people of Rome, reading of his exploits, saw in him a hero, a man who brought vast territories, wealth, and glory to the Republic. Yet behind the victories, there were shadows. The wars in Gaul had cost countless lives, both Roman and Gallic. Entire tribes were displaced, cities burned, and cultures subdued. Caesar's ambition was insatiable, and the wealth he extracted from Gaul funded his growing political machinery, paid the debts he had incurred, and ensured the unwavering loyalty of his legions. These soldiers, veterans of endless campaigns, adored Caesar not only for his leadership but for his willingness to share their hardships. He marched with them, ate their food, and stood with them in the trenches, a commander who was also a comrade. As winter settled over Gaul, the landscape blanketed in frost and mist, Caesar's camps remained active, their fires flickering against the darkness. The crackling of kindling, the quiet murmurs of sentries, and the distant howls of wolves filled the air. Somewhere in his tent, by the dim light of an oil lamp, Caesar penned his accounts, shaping his own legacy with each stroke of the stylus. Outside, the legions rested, sharpening swords and mending armor, ever ready for the next command. And so, Gaul was conquered, not only by the sword, but by the pen, by strategy, by endurance, and by the unyielding will of one man determined to elevate himself above all others. As the cold winds swept over the hills and forests, they carried with them whispers of change. Rome had grown richer, more powerful, but in Caesar's heart a new thought began to stir. If he could conquer Gaul, what then stood between him and Rome itself? Beneath the canopy of winter stars, with the earth hardened by frost and the night air sharp and still, the world seemed to pause, holding its breath. For beyond the borders of Gaul, the Rubicon waited, a small river, unremarkable in size, but destined to become the boundary between republic and empire, between peace and civil war. And as Caesar's thoughts turned southward to Rome, so too did the wheels of history begin to turn once more, slow and inevitable as the coming of the dawn. The soft glow of early morning casts a gentle silver across the land, as a thin mist hugs the banks of a modest river that winds quietly through the northern plains of Italy. The Rubicon, an unassuming stream by the standards of nature, its waters flowing gently between grassy shores. Yet it stood not merely as a geographic boundary, but as the symbolic line between war and peace, between the provinces and the heart of Rome itself. On this particular morning, under a sky brushed faintly with dawn's blush, Julius Caesar pauses at its edge, contemplating the most fateful decision of his life. The conquest of Gaul had made Caesar immensely wealthy and celebrated. His soldiers, hardened by years of campaigning, were fiercely loyal, ready to follow him anywhere, even against their own countrymen. Yet while his star had risen beyond measure back in Rome, the political winds had turned cold and hostile. The Senate, led by Caesar's old ally turned rival, Pompey the Great, grew increasingly wary of Caesar's power. The first triumvirate that had once united Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus was fractured. Crassus lay dead in the sands of Parthia, and Pompey had aligned himself with the Optimates, the conservative faction determined to preserve the old republic. By senatorial decree, Caesar had been ordered to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, an expectation that carried not just humility but risk. Stripped of his legions, Caesar would face political attacks, prosecutions for alleged abuses in Gaul, and the very real threat of exile or death. For a man who had risen through cunning, courage, and relentless ambition, surrender was never an option. And so here he stood, before the quiet ripple of the Rubicon, his mind heavy with calculation. Crossing it with his army would be a declaration of war, an irreversible step that could end in ultimate power or utter ruin. The ancient historian Suetonius tells us that in this moment, Caesar muttered to himself the fateful phrase, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. Whether those precise words were ever spoken hardly matters, for the truth was plain. Once he stepped across, there could be no turning back. His soldiers, their boots thick with mud and frost, looked to him for direction. They did not need grand speeches or promises of riches. Their trust in Caesar was unshakable, forged in the fires of countless battles. And so they crossed, following their general over the shallow waters, each step echoing with the weight of destiny. The Republic had been challenged, and civil war had begun. The march southward was swift and deliberate. Town after town opened its gates to Caesar, not with resistance, but with cautious deference or quiet support. In Rome, panic spread like wildfire. Senators fled the city, and Pompey, unprepared for such decisive action, retreated with his forces to the south, eventually embarking on a path toward Greece to gather strength. Caesar, entering Rome without a fight, found a city bereft of leadership, its mighty senate now a hollow chamber echoing with uncertainty. Yet Caesar did not linger long in the capital. He understood that to claim Rome was not enough. He had to secure it by defeating Pompey, the only rival capable of matching his military prowess. Thus began a campaign that would span continents, from the shores of Italy to the plains of Greece, from the coasts of Spain to the deserts of Egypt. But before leaving Rome, Caesar sought to establish legitimacy. He ensured that public order was maintained, grain supplies distributed, and debts eased, gestures that reminded the populace that he was not a conqueror of Romans, but their protector. It was a subtle, masterful stroke of optics. Where the Senate had abandoned the people, Caesar had remained, steady and capable. As his legions marched eastward to confront Pompey, the memory of the Rubicon lingered like a shadow behind them. That shallow stream, crossed in quiet determination, had unleashed a storm upon the Republic. Yet in the midst of war, Caesar remained composed, his mind a balance of strategy and vision. His writings from this period reveal a man who saw himself not as a destroyer of Rome's traditions, but as their savior, a necessary force to bring order to a decaying system. At night, as his campfires flickered beneath starry skies, Caesar would often write letters, dispatch orders, or compose his accounts of the war. The murmur of soldiers exchanging stories, the distant neigh of horses, and the soft rustle of wind through the encampments would have been his constant companions. It was a world in transition, where each dawn brought fresh uncertainty, but also the steady rhythm of purpose. The Rubicon was more than a river. It was a threshold between the old world and the new, between the Republic's fading glory and the embryonic stirrings of empire. In crossing it, Caesar had not merely marched against his enemies. He had crossed a deeper, more philosophical line, one that separated the age of senatorial supremacy from the age of the singular commanding leader. As the moon rose, high over Italy's hills and valleys, casting its pale light upon the land, Caesar's army pressed onward, their general at the helm, his gaze ever forward. Behind him, the waters of the Rubicon continued their gentle flow, indifferent to the weight of history that had passed through them. And ahead, across fields yet untouched by war, the fate of Rome awaited, trembling, shifting, like a flame in the breeze. The world slept on, unaware that the first strokes of an empire story had been written not with proclamations, but with the steady steps of men wading quietly through a stream at the edge of dawn. Night settles gently over the Mediterranean, its dark waters reflecting the scattered stars like 1,000 glimmering eyes. The winds are soft, carrying with them the distant salt of the sea and the earthy aroma of lands far apart, yet bound by the same sky. Across these waters, armies move, banners ripple, and the quiet hum of oars slicing through the waves echoes the deeper turmoil of a republic at war with itself. For Julius Caesar, the Rubicon was just the beginning. Now, the fate of Rome hung in the balance, and its soul was to be contested on fields drenched with blood, where brother stood against brother. The year was 49 BC. Caesar's swift advance into Italy had sent Pompey, the great, retreating eastward, regrouping in Greece, where his supporters rallied in earnest. Though Pompey commanded the loyalty of many senators and the prestige of past victories, he hesitated to face Caesar immediately. He preferred to wait, to gather strength, to starve Caesar of resources and time. But Caesar was relentless. His mind, sharp and restless, sought resolution, not in delay, but in decisive action. First, Caesar turned westward to Spain, where Pompey's legions stood as a critical threat. In a lightning campaign, Caesar crossed the Pyrenees and engaged the Pompeians with characteristic speed. The siege of Ilerda showcased his brilliance in logistics and maneuvering, outflanking his enemies and forcing their surrender without prolonged bloodshed. It was a prelude to the wider conflict, a reminder that Caesar was a master not just of battle, but of strategy. Yet the heart of the conflict lay across the Ionian Sea in Greece, where Pompey waited with a formidable force, bolstered by legions, allies, and naval supremacy. In 48 BC, Caesar crossed the sea in a daring, precarious move, landing his army on foreign shores despite the looming threat of Pompey's fleet. His men, veterans of Gaul and Spain, trusted him implicitly, even when rations were scarce and reinforcements uncertain. They marched through the Greek landscape, past olive groves, through stony valleys, and beneath the shadow of ancient temples, driven by loyalty to their general and the promise of victory. The decisive encounter came near the city of Pharsalus. The morning of battle was clear, the air heavy with anticipation. Caesar's forces were outnumbered, perhaps half the size of Pompey's, yet confidence radiated from him. He knew his men, their strengths, their hearts. He famously told his soldiers that they fought not just for glory, but for their lives, their freedom, and for him, a bond deeper than command, almost familial in its depth. Pompey, commanding from his position, believed that Caesar would falter, that his thinner ranks and wearied men would break under pressure. But as the battle commenced, Caesar's tactics unfurled with precision. His cavalry, arranged to counter Pompey's feared horsemen, performed with remarkable discipline. When Pompey's cavalry advanced, Caesar's hidden reserves emerged, driving them back with ruthless efficiency. The rout spread, confusion taking hold of Pompey's lines, and soon his forces collapsed beneath the relentless push of Caesar's infantry. Victory at Pharsalus was complete. Pompey, his dreams shattered, fled the battlefield, his fate sealed not by combat, but by betrayal. He escaped to Egypt, seeking refuge with the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. Yet even here, in this ancient land of pyramids and deserts, the shadow of Roman politics reached out. Fearing Caesar's wrath and hoping to curry favor, Ptolemy's advisors had Pompey murdered upon his arrival, his body discarded unceremoniously, a grim and lonely end for one of Rome's greatest generals. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, he was presented with Pompey's severed head, a gesture meant to please, but one that instead disgusted him. Whatever their rivalry, Pompey had been a Roman consul, once a friend and a peer. Caesar wept for his fallen adversary, a rare and telling glimpse into the complex web of respect, rivalry, and remembrance that bound these titans of history. Yet Egypt was not done with Caesar. Drawn into the dynastic struggle between Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra VII, Caesar found himself entangled in both politics and passion. Cleopatra, brilliant and charismatic, famously had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters rolled in a carpet, emerging as a vision of grace and cunning. The alliance they forged was both strategic and intimate. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra secured her throne, and together they navigated the labyrinth of Egyptian power. But Rome called Caesar back. Civil war was not yet done. Though Pompey was gone, remnants of the senatorial opposition persisted in Africa and Spain. Caesar moved with his habitual swiftness, crushing opposition wherever it arose. In Africa, he defeated the remaining Pompeians at Thapsus, and in Spain, he confronted Pompey's sons, ending their rebellion at the bloody Battle of Munda in 45 BC. Each victory, though hard won, cemented Caesar's supremacy, yet also thinned the Republic's spirit, for with every rival crushed, the old balance of power eroded further. Rome, once a republic of competing voices, now hummed with the singular will of one man. Caesar returned not as a mere consul or general, but as a ruler in all but name, dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. The city that had once exiled kings now stood adorned with statues and honours bearing Caesar's image. His triumphs paraded through the streets, lavish and grand, displaying the spoils of conquest, captives, treasures, and the pride of a man who had made the world tremble. Yet beneath the celebration, shadows stirred. In the marble halls of the Senate, resentment festered. To many, Caesar was not a saviour, but a monarch in all but title, a living challenge to the Republic's ideals. The Civil War had birthed not just a victor, but a question that haunted every Roman heart. Had liberty been exchanged for order? Was the Republic, with its messy freedoms, now merely a memory? As twilight falls over Rome, the city rests uneasy. The streets glow with the last light of day, and the Tiber flows on, indifferent to the struggles of men. In the stillness, one can almost hear the echoes of swords, the cries of soldiers, and the mournful footsteps of a republic torn by its own contradictions. Caesar stands at the pinnacle of his power, yet the winds whisper of betrayal, as if history itself knows that peace, once won by war, is always fragile, as delicate as the hush that precedes a storm. Dawn rises gently over Rome, washing the city in hues of soft gold and pale rose. The rooftops glisten with morning dew, and the air carries the faint perfume of crushed herbs, whetstone, and distant baking bread. The city awakens slowly, like a great beast stretching from slumber, yet in the heart of its marble corridors and echoing forums, a profound change lingers. For Rome no longer stirs under the uncertain hand of the Senate, but beneath the assured shadow of a single man. Julius Caesar, having triumphed over all his enemies, stands now as dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. The Republic remains in name, but its substance, its soul, has shifted irrevocably. To walk the streets of Rome in these days was to sense the transformation. Statues of Caesar adorned public squares. His image, once confined to the battlefield, now stood enshrined beside the likenesses of gods and legendary heroes. Temples bore his name, festivals honoured his victories, and the Senate itself, cowed and compliant, had declared him not only perpetual dictator, but also the father of the fatherland. His likeness appeared on coinage, a privilege previously reserved for deities, and the very calendar was reformed to reflect his lasting imprint, the month of Quintilis renamed July in his honour. Yet Caesar was not content with mere titles and tributes. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by scrolls, maps, and the soft scratch of quills, he envisioned a Rome reborn. His mind, ever restless, conceived of reforms meant not just to consolidate his rule, but to reshape the Republic into a more efficient, more equitable system. He revised the census, reorganized debt laws, and restructured the grain dole to stabilize the food supply. He extended citizenship to distant provinces, binding the outer reaches of the Republic more closely to the heart of Rome, and he initiated grand public works, roads, aqueducts, temples, designed to restore the city's grandeur and functionality. Among his most enduring legacies was the reform of the calendar. Working alongside the Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes, Caesar introduced the Julian calendar, a system that aligned more accurately with the solar year, replacing the haphazard, manipulated lunar cycles that had plagued Rome's timekeeping. This calendar, with only slight modifications, would endure for millennia, a testament to Caesar's foresight and his desire to impose order on both time and empire. Yet, for all his achievements, a subtle unease permeated Rome's patrician class. Power, when so thoroughly concentrated in one individual, breeds disquiet in those who recall the city's ancient disdain for kings. To the Senate's old guard, Caesar's perpetual dictatorship felt like a coronation in all but name. He wore the purple cloak of triumph, sat upon golden chairs in public, and accepted honors that blurred the line between ruler and monarch. Whispers stirred in the shadows of the Curia, in the quiet corners of aristocratic villas, where senators exchanged glances heavy with conspiracy. Caesar, perhaps sensing the tension, remained outwardly magnanimous. He forgave former enemies, elevating some to positions of influence. Brutus, Cassius, and others who had once opposed him were welcomed back into the political fold, their past defiance seemingly absolved. But forgiveness can be its own form of power, and for some, being spared was less a gift and more a constant, humiliating reminder of their subjugation. His relationship with the Roman people, however, remained strong. They loved him, the general who had conquered Gaul, defeated Pompey, and brought stability after years of civil strife. His public works provided employment, his games and festivals delighted the masses, and his promises of expansion stirred the imagination of empire. He planned new campaigns, including a grand invasion of Parthia, envisioning fresh conquests that would eclipse even Alexander the Great. The world, it seemed, still held more for Caesar to conquer. Yet in the quiet of his private moments, perhaps even Caesar felt the strain of supreme power. The burden of governance, the ceaseless demands of administration, the wary glances of senators, and the weight of legacy, these are pressures no laurels can ease. In the sanctity of his villa, as oil lamps flickered and cast long, wavering shadows on the frescoed walls, he might have reflected on his journey, from the narrow streets of Subura to the pinnacle of Roman glory. The boy who had once fled Sulla's purges had risen to shape the Republic itself, yet at what cost? Outside, Rome thrived under his rule, its streets safer, its coffers fuller, its provinces better managed. But beneath the surface, the city held its breath. The Republic had not died, not yet, but it lay dormant, slumbering beneath the weight of Caesar's ambition. The Senate, diminished though it was, remained, and with it the embers of resistance, glowing faintly in the dark. Even as spring approached and the days grew longer, the chill of uncertainty lingered. Rome had always prided itself on its resistance to monarchy, on the sacred memory of the Tarquin kings, cast down centuries before. Caesar, for all his greatness, tread dangerously close to that ancient precipice. Crowns offered and refused, ceremonies that mimicked kingship. These gestures fed the murmurs that the Republic was living on borrowed time. In the streets, among the bustling markets and shaded porticos, the citizens went about their days, enjoying the relative peace, yet keenly aware that peace in Rome was often the prelude to change. The Tiber flowed as ever, steady and untroubled, reflecting the marble splendor of temples and the grandeur of Caesar's new monuments. But rivers remember, just as cities do, and the waters seemed to carry whispers of the past, of kings, tyrants, and the inevitable cycle of rise and fall. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Rome in a warm, golden haze, the city rested under the quiet dominion of its greatest son. Caesar stood supreme, his vision unfulfilled, but his grasp absolute. Yet, in the lingering glow of twilight, one might sense that even in his ascendancy, shadows gathered. The air itself seemed to hum with the quiet knowledge that power, once absolute, rarely endures without a price. And somewhere in the darkened halls of the Senate, the seeds of that price had already begun to sprout. The morning of March the 15th dawned softly over Rome, the air still tinged with the lingering coolness of winter, though the promise of spring lies just beneath the surface. The city wakes slowly, bathed in a gentle golden light that spills over the rooftops and seeps between narrow alleyways. From high upon the Capitoline Hill to the sprawling forum below, the marble of Rome glows with a pale warmth, as if the city itself is stretching awake from a long, quiet slumber. But beneath the hush of this ordinary day, something restless stirs. An invisible thread of tension pulled tight across the city's heart. For this day is the Ides of March, a date already steeped in superstition, and it will be anything but ordinary. Julius Caesar rises with the dawn, as he often does, his home still cloaked in the soft shadows of early light. The air in his villa is fragrant with the faint aroma of incense and fresh bread. Servants move quietly through the halls, their footsteps muffled against cool stone floors. Outside his chambers, the city begins to murmur to life. Vendors setting up stalls, senators donning their togas, the rhythmic sweep of brooms against the dusty streets. Caesar prepares himself for the day's proceedings. There is a session of the Senate scheduled, and though he moves with the confidence of a man accustomed to power, there is a faint hesitancy in his step. He has been warned, more than once. The soothsayer Spurinna had cautioned him days before. Beware the Ides of March. His wife Calpurnia had woken distressed from dreams of his statue bleeding, of cries rising from the streets. She had pleaded with him not to go to the Senate today. For a moment, Caesar considered heeding her words, his own instinct whispering caution, but then, with a quiet resolve, he dismissed his fears. What was power, after all, if not the courage to face what may come? Outside, the sky is clear and calm, a perfect Roman spring morning. The path to the theatre of Pompey, where the Senate convenes while the Curia is under repair, winds gently through the city's familiar arteries. As Caesar steps into his litter, carried by steady hands, the streets unfold before him like a well-worn map. He passes temples and markets, citizens pausing to glimpse the man who, to many, is Rome incarnate, the victor of Gaul, the bringer of peace, the perpetual dictator. Yet in the shadowed porticos of the Senate, men gather with colder hearts. Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, names that will be forever etched in history, stand among the conspirators, their expressions grave and unreadable. They believe they act not in malice, but in duty. To them, Caesar is not a savior, but a tyrant in all but name. His concentration of power, his honors, his near-divine status, all these are symptoms of monarchy reborn, a threat to the republic's soul. They whisper of liberty, of restoring Rome's dignity, but beneath their resolve lies uncertainty, fear, even admiration for the man they plan to kill. Caesar arrives at the theatre of Pompey, the Senate waiting within its grand hall, light pouring through high windows to cast long, slanting beams across the marble floor. He moves confidently among them, dressed in his robes, his presence as commanding as ever. The hall, though filled with familiar faces, carries a subtle chill. Smiles are thin, greetings clipped. The air feels heavier than usual, as though the room itself holds its breath. As Caesar takes his seat, the conspirators close in. There is a pretense of petition, of seeking favor, but beneath their cloaks, daggers lie hidden, their cold metal pressed against warm flesh. The first strike comes swiftly, sharp and shocking. Caesar rises, stunned, his eyes flashing with disbelief and pain. More blades follow, swift, relentless, cutting through fabric and flesh alike. The conspirators surround him, striking in a flurry of motion and fear. each blow an echo of the ancient pledge to defend the Republic. Among them stands Brutus, a man Caesar had trusted, loved almost as a son. When he sees Brutus's dagger raised, legend holds that Caesar's resistance falters. Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus? Whether those words were truly spoken, history cannot confirm, but the sentiment is eternal, the sting not just of betrayal, but of heartbreak. Caesar collapses at the base of Pompey's statue, his blood staining the marble at the feet of another man who had once been his rival. In a cruel twist of fate, Pompey's likeness watches over the death of his conqueror. The hall is silent now, save for the gasping breaths of the dying dictator and the quickened heartbeats of the assassins. His body lies still, the room heavy with the enormity of what has transpired. The Republic, they believe, is saved. Outside, Rome carries on in its morning routine, unaware of the storm that has just broken within the Senate walls. It is only when news spreads, like ripples from a stone cast into still water, that the city erupts into confusion, fear, and mourning. The man who had tamed Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and ruled Rome, now lies lifeless, his grand plans undone by steel and suspicion. That night, Rome grows quiet, an uneasy hush settling over streets that had once cheered Caesar's triumphs. The stars wheel overhead, impassive, indifferent to the affairs of men. In the homes of senators, conspirators whisper of freedom, but in the alleys and forums, the common people grieve, for many saw Caesar as their champion, their shield against the caprice of the aristocracy. And yet, the assassin's dream of restoring the Republic would prove fleeting, for power, once loosed from its moorings, is not so easily reclaimed. Caesar's death had not resurrected the Republic. It had merely opened a door to more chaos, more war, more ambition. The dagger's work was done, but its shadow would stretch far longer than any of the conspirators could have imagined. As night deepens and the Tiber glides quietly through the city, the water reflects the shimmering constellations, ancient witnesses to the fall of yet another great man. The air carries the faintest breeze, rustling the cypress trees that line Rome's avenues, as if the city itself sighs, exhausted by the endless dance of power and betrayal. And so ends the life of Julius Caesar. Not on the battlefield, but within the cold marble halls of the Senate. His story, though, is far from over. For in his death, seeds were sown, seeds that would one day blossom into an empire, greater than even he might have dreamed. Night lingers gently over Rome in the days that follow Caesar's death, the city cloaked in a delicate hush, as though mourning settles not just in the hearts of the people, but in the very stones beneath their feet. The streets that once echoed with the shouts of soldiers and the cries of the market now seem quieter, more subdued. The marble forums, bathed in soft moonlight, carry the ghost of a man who once walked them as their master. The dictator is gone, but his absence resounds louder than his presence ever did. The city feels hollowed, a grand theatre where the actor has vanished mid-performance, leaving the audience breathless and uncertain. The conspirators, blood still staining their togas, believed themselves saviors. They expected jubilation, the open-armed return of liberty, the revival of the Republic's proud traditions. Yet Rome did not celebrate. Instead, a wave of sorrow, confusion, and anger swept through the populace. Caesar had been adored by many, the veterans who had fought under his banners, the common folk who had benefited from his reforms, the urban poor who found in him a champion of their welfare. His death had not freed them, it had cast them into an uncertain void. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant and friend, stepped forward to seize the moment. A soldier, a consul, and a master of rhetoric, Antony knew the power of words over swords. At Caesar's funeral, beneath the open sky, where the air was heavy with the scent of incense and pyres, Antony delivered a eulogy that would echo through the ages. With each phrase, he reminded the gathered masses of Caesar's victories, his generosity, his vision for Rome. He read Caesar's will aloud, revealing that the dictator had left gifts to the citizens of Rome: money, land, promises of security. The crowd, stirred from grief to fury, looked upon the conspirators not as liberators, but as butchers. A funeral became a spark, and Rome caught fire with rage. The people rioted, the conspirators fled, their dreams of a restored republic already crumbling to ash. In the days that followed, effigies of the assassins burned in the streets, their names cursed in whispers and shouts alike. In this vacuum of power, Antony moved swiftly. Yet another figure emerged from the shadows: Gaius Octavius, the grandnephew and posthumously adopted son of Julius Caesar. A youth in years, but sharp in mind, Octavian, as he would come to be known, stepped into the fray with quiet determination. Caesar had named him heir, not just of wealth, but of legacy. Though barely 19, Octavian grasped what others did not: that to inherit Caesar's name was to inherit the loyalty of his legions, the affection of the people, and the fear of his enemies. A fragile alliance formed between Antony and Octavian, alongside the general Lepidus. Together they established the Second Triumvirate, a political alliance designed not of trust, but of necessity. Their goal was clear: avenge Caesar, crush the conspirators, and assert control over the fractured republic. The triumvirate declared proscriptions, grim lists of enemies marked for death, their properties seized, their names struck from Rome's rolls. Blood flowed again, but this time it was not the blood of civil war, but of purges, methodical, cold, and merciless. Brutus and Cassius, the foremost conspirators, fled east, raising armies in desperation to defend their vision of the Republic. Yet their cause, righteous in their eyes, could not withstand the might of the triumvirate. At the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, in the rugged lands of Macedonia, Antony and Octavian faced the forces of Brutus and Cassius in a brutal, decisive clash. The ground shook with the weight of legions, the air thick with the cries of the wounded. Both Cassius and Brutus, faced with defeat, chose death by their own hands, preferring the certainty of the grave to the humiliation of capture. With the conspirators vanquished, the Republic's last breath grew shallow, yet peace did not follow. Antony and Octavian, uneasy partners, grew distrustful of one another. Antony's affair and political alliance with Cleopatra of Egypt drew suspicion and scandal in Rome, casting him as a man seduced by foreign charms, a traitor to Roman values. Octavian, ever patient, used these suspicions to his advantage, painting himself as the defender of Roman virtue. The final confrontation between Antony and Octavian came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, a naval battle on the Ionian Sea, where the clash of oars, the twang of archers, and the roar of flames devouring ships wrote the last chapter of the Republic's long saga of civil wars. Antony and Cleopatra, their forces outmaneuvered, retreated to Egypt. There, faced with inevitable defeat, they both chose death: Antony by his own sword, Cleopatra by the bite of an asp, according to legend, though her true end remains wrapped in mystery. And so, from the echoes of Caesar's assassination, from the dreams of the Republic's restoration, emerged a new order. Octavian, the quiet youth turned calculating leader, returned to Rome as its unchallenged master. In 27 BC, he accepted the title Augustus, and with it, the mantle of Rome's first emperor. The Republic, already hollowed by decades of strife, faded into memory, replaced by the shimmering facade of the Empire, an autocracy cloaked in republican forms, a new Rome born from the ashes of the old. Yet in quiet corners of the city, beneath the shadowed porticos and along the meandering Tiber, the memory of Caesar endured. His comet, which streaked across the sky shortly after his death, was seen by many as a divine sign, a soul ascending to the heavens. The Senate declared him a god, Divus Julius, and his legacy became immortal not just in marble, but in the hearts of the people and the lineage of emperors who would claim descent from his name. The echoes of his death resounded through the centuries, a reminder of ambition's cost, of power's perils, and of the delicate thread between republic and empire. Rome moved forward, yet always beneath the gaze of the man whose life and death had reshaped the world. As the night deepens over Rome once more, the city sleeps under a blanket of stars, the gentle murmur of the Tiber flowing steadily in the dark. The forums stand quiet, their stones still warmed by the sun's departed glow, and in the hush of the night one might still imagine the faintest whisper, a voice carried on the wind, reminding the city that all power, no matter how great, is fleeting, but legacy endures. The night sky hangs heavy with stars over the city of Rome, each point of light shimmering like a distant memory. The air is cool and still, save for the occasional murmur of the Tiber, flowing patiently as it always has, winding its familiar path through the heart of the eternal city. The streets are quieter now, the chaos of civil war long past, but the stones remember. They remember footsteps, the sound of distant legions, the roar of the forum, the hushed conspiracies whispered beneath porticos. Above it all, even now, the shadow of one man stretches across the ages, Julius Caesar. Though his life ended abruptly on that fateful Ides of March, his presence has never truly left Rome. His name, once spoken with reverence or fear, became something far more enduring. The word Caesar itself transformed, not just a name, but a title, a symbol of authority and command. From it would come the Kaisers of Germany, the Tsars of Russia, echoes of Rome's might, carried into new lands, centuries later, by those who sought to inherit a fragment of his aura. In life, Caesar had rewritten the Republic's destiny. In death, he became the cornerstone upon which the Roman Empire was built. His adopted son, Octavian, now Augustus, forged an empire that would span continents, its legions marching from the sands of Africa to the mists of Britain, from the forests of Germania to the deserts of the Near East. Each conquest, each monument, each law and edict carried within it the faint trace of Caesar's vision, a world ordered under one ruler, guided by Roman law, Roman language, Roman power. Yet Caesar's shadow is not only political. He was, after all, a man of many talents, a statesman, a general, and a writer. His commentaries on the Gallic War remain to this day a masterwork of clear, concise Latin, studied by scholars and students alike, not only for their historical content, but for their literary brilliance. In his own words, Caesar painted his victories, his struggles, his strategies, a self-made tapestry that preserved his deeds for all posterity. It is through these words that we hear his voice, steady and measured, recounting the events that reshaped the map of Europe. His impact is also felt in the calendar that governs our days. The Julian calendar, introduced under his guidance, sought to correct the drifting of months and seasons. With its precision, it aligned human timekeeping more closely to the solar year, a gift of order that would guide the world for centuries, and even now, in its refined form, still marks the rhythm of our lives. But perhaps his most profound legacy is the question he leaves behind, a question that hums quietly through the corridors of power in every age. What is the price of ambition? Caesar's life was a testament to the heights that brilliance, courage, and determination can reach. Yet his death was a reminder of the fragile balance between greatness and hubris, between leadership and tyranny. The republic he claimed to serve did not survive his ascent. The freedom that the assassins sought to preserve crumbled beneath their daggers, giving way instead to emperors, dynasties, and the unrelenting march of empire. Still, Rome would forever carry his imprint. Temples were raised in his honor, coins minted with his likeness. The Divus, Julius, the divine Caesar, was worshipped, his spirit intertwined with the city's destiny. The forum where he had once stood was now a place of pilgrimage, and his temple became a sanctuary where citizens left offerings and prayers, as though the man who had defied the odds in life could still intercede from the beyond. And beyond Rome, his legend grew. Writers, poets, and historians across generations reimagined his life, his love affairs, his military genius, his tragic fall. Shakespeare's words gave him a voice anew, making his final betrayal immortal on the stage. In every retelling, Caesar becomes more than a man. He becomes an idea, a symbol of the eternal struggle between power and principle, between the mortal and the divine. Today, if one were to walk the ruins of Rome, the remnants of the Forum, the Senate, the Curia, you can still feel his presence. The stones, worn and weathered, might whisper of his footsteps, his orations, his commands. Stand quietly near the site of his cremation, where flowers are still laid, and you might almost imagine the faint rustle of his toga, the steady cadence of his voice, the measured confidence of a man who, even in death, refused to fade entirely from the world's memory. As night deepens and the city sleeps, the Tiber glides on under the soft gaze of the stars. The empire that Caesar unwittingly fathered is long gone, its borders now lines in history books, its legions silent. Yet his shadow lingers, not as something ominous, but as a quiet presence, a gentle reminder that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the stories we tell, the words we speak, the days we count, and the ambitions we dare to chase. So let your mind drift now across the centuries, past marble columns and crumbling arches, through quiet libraries and bustling forums, along dusty roads that once carried the thunder of Roman boots. Somewhere, beneath the same vast sky that watched Caesar's rise and fall, the world dreams on, carrying forward the echoes of a man who refused to be forgotten. And so, we reach the end of our journey, a story of ambition and destiny, of power and fragility, of a man whose life cast a shadow across the ages. Julius Caesar's rise and fall remind us that history is not merely a chain of dates and battles, but a living tapestry of dreams, choices, and the ever-turning wheel of time. If you're still awake, thank you for joining me on this quiet exploration of the past. Let your thoughts drift like mist across the plains of time, and allow rest to find you, softly, slowly. Or, if curiosity still stirs within you, why not continue the adventure with one of our other calming journeys through history? Perhaps to the life of Alexander the Great, or the mysteries of ancient Egypt. If you've enjoyed this story, please do like and subscribe. It's a simple gesture, but one that helps me to keep making these peaceful explorations for you to unwind with. Wherever you are, thank you for listening, and until next time, sleep well.